Everybody. It's the crossover show. Today we're starting something new. I'm Joshua, and this is Kanaye. We are starting a podcast episode film group work. We'll put it as that, dedicated to covering college basketball because the season is starting in just about 2 weeks, and we're starting off by looking at the AP Top 25 preseason poll and some early predictions for this coming season. So, Kanaye, let's start off. What do you think about this year's preseason top 25 poll?
I gotta say, in terms of like the past few years, I like this preseason poll a lot compared to some of the ones we've seen in the last few years. I think overall they did a pretty good job. There are a few teams that I think are a little too high and a few that are too low. That we're going to touch on. But overall, I do have to say I really do like the top 10, and I think it's a very solid top five. Just towards the bottom, I think there's a few that they kind of snuck in there that probably maybe shouldn't be in this top 25. But again, we'll talk about that coming up.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. And to definitely get on that point, because one of the biggest talking points I've heard are particularly the teams in the lower 25, 2025 part that really shouldn't be there. We're talking about teams like Kentucky, Rutgers, um, perhaps other teams in there that you might consider, Cincinnati even, that we're considering, why are they there? Particularly for me, I don't understand why Kentucky's there. I think the team is so new to the scene with Mark Pope being recently put in as new coach and having a team entirely made of transfers. It just doesn't really feel as though a top 25 preseason ranking is worthy.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't mind Kentucky coming in at 23. I could even see people making an argument for them to be higher. I think Jackson Robinson is going to make a huge leap this year. I know the team is primarily composed of transfers, but I mean, that's what Mark Pope had to do, coming in, taking over the job with Cal leaving, and a lot of those a lot of people transferring out to go with Cal over to Arkansas. So that was just that was a situation that was handed to Mark Pope, and I think he's made the best of it. I think he did a really good job in bringing some of his guys from BYU. The addition of Kobe Brea, one of the most efficient 3-point shooters in the last decade we've seen. I think guys like that are going to contribute a lot to trying to bring Kentucky back to a winning program that can actually go make some damage in March.
No, I definitely agree with you. I think there's really a good chance that they can go that far, but I don't really know if that's this season or perhaps probably future seasons. But
Yeah,
anyway, we definitely should talk about at least the top five teams in this poll because
right,
there are some familiar faces, there are some interesting faces. So we got Kansas number one, which I think we all expected. If you're new
right.
to the game,
Yeah.
Kansas has been preseason top 21 consistently over the past 10 years. It's no surprise. Will they live up to the hopes of not being a first round exit like last year? Probably. I think the team is a little bit better than they were last year. A lot better to be real with you. I think Self has it
Yeah.
down. But then we have the split off with UConn, previous, two-time national champion being number two, but
Oh, they
Bama
came in
being number
number three.
three. Oh, they were three. Bama would be
Yeah.
number
Bama
two.
two, UConn
Bama
three.
two, UConn three, which does bring an interesting point in, why are both teams there? You know,
I Now, I mean, if I had a vote, I'd probably put Alabama at one, just because I think them bringing back their core, that primarily a lot of their core that they had last year with Sears and Grant Nelson, and then they addressed the needs. They addressed what they needed to get in the portal with a rim protector. They got that in Big Cliff Amore, and I just think having a large sample size of what we see Alabama can do with the players they already have, I just think collectively they have a better chance of playing all together. Kansas, of course, they loaded up in the portal with the additions of Zeke Mayo, AJ Storr, and a few other shooters, which, they didn't have shot makers last year. Now they have them. But, again, you don't know how these guys are all going to play together. You still have DeJuan Harris, you still have Hunter Dickinson, you still have KJ Adams. You don't know, there's only one basketball, so you don't know if these guys can play well together. And I think Bill Self talked about that. He wants guys. He talked specifically about AJ Storr. He wants to see Storr get in, crash the offensive glass, and try to pick up guys up full court. And you know, I think AJ Storr is fully capable of doing that. But will he want to do that? Being Wisconsin's leading scorer last year, now at Kansas, will he be willing to accept a role like that? But again, I can understand Kansas slotting in at number one and Alabama number two. UConn at number three, I think makes sense, just because you have to give them, the benefit of the doubt. Back to back national champs, Dan Hurley. I don't think their roster stacks up nicely, as well as the past 2 years. Compared to some of the other teams in the top five this year, they're really limited in their backcourt with Samson Johnson and Terrace Reed Jr. But after watching that URI scrimmage the other day, you definitely see they're weak on the glass this year compared to past years where they had Klingon and Adama Sanogo. And I think that could pose a bigger problem. But it's Dan Hurley; he could figure things out.
No, I definitely agree with you. I think there's really a big opportunity for all these teams. And then we also have Houston, which sits in that top five as well. And I think personally they should have been a little bit higher, but in all reality, we are recognizing this team is now losing Jamal Shed, which is a huge part of the squad from last year's team. Will LJ Cryer fill in that role? That's really be decided. I think he can. I think you say no, but we can only
Yeah,
really
I
find
don't know if
out.
I'm a believer in LJ Cryer just yet. I think him losing Shed is going to put a lot more pressure on him. And again, I'm just kind of going back to last year. I think their biggest weakness was probably their size down low. And I just don't know if, again, this year, if they really have the backcourt to be able to allow them to go on a Final Four run.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And do you see any team that was left outside the top 25 that you think could really surprise people this year?
I think St. John's. I really do. I think Rick Pitino's second year. I think he's going to come back with a vengeance. I do think the Big East is pretty open this year. I mean, of course, UConn would probably be the favorite going in, followed by Creighton, Xavier. But I think St. John's has a chance to make a lot of noise this year in the Big East, and I think they're going to have a really good regular season in conference play. And I was really shocked them landing Kadari Richmond, who was like arguably the best player in the portal this cycle. And I just felt that they probably should have been in this top 25, but
No, I agree with you. And I was going to say the exact same thing. St. John's is such a good opportunity this year, especially with their transfer portal. And Patino, we all know, is such a good coach. And with
right.
this squad, it's just hard to see him getting anywhere away from the top 25, to
The
be
one
honest.
concern I have with St. John's is their lack of shooting. I think they're going to be really reliant on Brady Dunlap making that leap in his sophomore year. If he can come in and hit shots, hit open shots, I think that's going to be huge for them. I know Devin Smith he's a pretty decent shot maker. I know he can do some stuff off the dribble. They're going to need him to be able to knock down some threes. Kadari, he's probably one of maybe five players last year who could go and single handedly win you a game. And I think him playing in a Rick Pitino style type of game is going to benefit him so much. I know Rick Pitino loves to run that 2-3 zone press, and I think Kadari is just going to eat in that set.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. But we're going to now move on to talking about our preseason first team All-Americans, or at least what we think will be them by the end of the year. And honestly, there's a lot of good players that have come in, both including freshmen and new transfers that have been talking to the portal. Honestly, a lot of places to be filled with this. I'll start off with you, Kanaye. Who do you think is taking up this AP All-American poll for
All
our
right.
top
So
five?
I think most people, me included, would probably have Mark Sears and RJ Davis as their front court, as their backcourt, my mistake, going, talking about preseason first team All Americans and probably who's going to end up being a first team All American. Mark Sears, I mean, he's my pick for National Player of the Year. It's not much an explanation needed. He's a guy that just can go out and, score 30. I even think back to last year, Stephon Castle on UConn. He was tasked with guarding the best ball handler on the teams, and they played in the tournament. And he was able to shut down a lot of guys like Boo Buie, Terrence Shannon Jr. Mark Sears was the one guy he couldn't stop. And I just think Sears is going to light it up this year. They're definitely, Alabama's coming back with a vengeance. They want to make it back to a Final Four. I know Nate Oates really, now that he's got that taste of the Final Four, I know he's definitely going to be coming back for it. And, again, I think Alabama's going to make it back to the Final Four. And I would, they're probably my pick to be in the national championship game. So I think
Yeah.
Mark Sears is going to have a really big year. RJ Davis, again, he could go off for 30 any night. They're really going to need it this year with the loss of Armando Bacot and guys like Harrison Ingram. So they're going to need RJ Davis to have a really large scoring output. And then I originally was looking at, one of the Tennessee transfers, like such as Chaz Lanier or Darlington Dubar, but I actually think Zeke Mayo is going to end up being on this first team All American team, and
Zeke
just
Mayo.
because I've heard the things Bill Self has said about Zeke Mayo being probably their best player up to this point in their preseason, their practices, and any scrimmages they've had up to this point. I think he's going to light it up. He's a really, really good shooter, and that's something that they kind of lacked last year. And now that they have it with Zeke Mayo and other guys who are probably going to be coming off the bench for them, I think Zeke Mayo is going to have a really, I think Zeke Mayo has a chance to have a really big year for them. Then rounding it out, I have Janai Broom, who some people think he's kind of reached his full potential as a college player. I think there's another level that Janai Broom can ascend to, and for Auburn and Bruce Pearl. And then rounding it out, I have Ryan Kalkbrenner. I think he's one of the most underrated players over the last 3 4 years. He's a 3 time Big East Defensive Player of the Year, and now with the loss of Baylor Sharman and guys like Trey Alexander, they're going to need Ryan Kalkbrenner to be able to do some more on offense, which I think he's more than capable of. He's a guy who doesn't foul when playing defense, and he's probably, yeah, he probably is, I'd say, the best rim protector this year in college basketball going in.
Yeah, no, it's honestly a pretty good list if you ask me. I honestly have something pretty similar. I'm not gonna lie. I did not think about Zeke Mayo at all, to be real with you, but I had the same backcourt with RJ Davis and Mark Sears. I actually I wouldn't be surprised to see Zeke Mayo hop into that role. Personally, I was listening more to your ideas of Chaslin here, so I do
Mhm.
have him at the three spot, possibly being in that scenario. Definitely another opportunity for a Dalton Connect type player to fill in for
Right.
Tennessee. Another great opportunity for them. I think also Tommy Lipsey can fill in that role depending on where he's at. He could be Big 12 Player of the Year for all we know. But in all reality, I think we're missing a big player, obviously beyond Broom, who I think also fills in for the four, Hunter Dickinson. I think personally, and this is maybe more or less my opinion, and based on what I've known about him from seeing all of his years of his play, he is, in my opinion at least, the best player on Kansas team, and probably the player of the year, in my opinion. As good as I've seen Mark Sears play, Hunter Dickinson has an insane level of game that I think was really left aside last year. He played so well at Michigan, and the fact that he was able to get that transfer portal change from a really bad Michigan team, by the way, to
Yeah.
arguably the best team in the country in Kansas really shows a lot. Obviously, injuries weighed down the entire team, so I can't really put 2023 into play. But this 2024-2025 season, I think will really show the breakup potential of Hunter Dickinson in his last year trying to get into the NBA, and I think it will push him over the edge. I don't know if he's going to average as much as, say, like Edie, for example, when it comes to other
Right.
centers, but he's going to have an insane display of defense and honestly a better offense than he's had last year. I think his offense was definitely lacking, but he can hit threes at a good rate. He probably does need to work more or less on his block rate, but overall, I think with the consideration of the backcourt and honestly the front court at Kansas that will definitely help him out. I would not be surprised to see Hunter Dickinson slide into that not only spot at the five on the All American first team, but the slot in for Player of the Year over Mark Sears himself, which says a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So Hunter Dickinson's your national player of the year.
Yeah, no, I would definitely
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
for me, it's Mark Sears. I mean, again, going back to what I said, I just think he's a guy who you really can't stop. I mean, just the shooting ability and, his ability to do stuff off the dribble. And I just think the last few years of college basketball, you've seen the bigs dominate the national player of the year races with, Edie, obviously, the last 2 years, and Luka Garza, Obi Toppin, guys like that. I think it's going to start to shift back more towards guards a little bit, especially this year, just the amount of guards that are like really have a chance to light it up this year. But I think, Mark Sears is just a notch above the other guards going into this year. And I think he's my pick for National Player of the Year.
yeah, I can definitely see that. And then we really got to talk about the fun stuff, that being our bracket. Obviously,
Right.
we can't really predict too much in the bracket, but we want to talk about the top four seeds and the final four seeds as well.
Yeah.
So, who do you have as your top four number one seeds going in?
My top four number one seeds. All right. So I think Kansas is going to be in there this year. They have
Are
they have the ability to
they
make shot making. I think they're a
are
one
they the
seed.
overall one seed?
I don't think they're the number one seed. Just how competitive the Big 12 is going to be this year with teams like Baylor, who uh, I also probably have as a one seed this year. Or actually, no, not a one seed, but I do have them making. I have them in as a Final Four pick for me. But Baylor, Houston, it's going to be a really competitive Big 12 as it was like back, going back to last year. But Kansas, I think, is definitely going to be a one seed. Alabama is my number one overall seed going to this year. Um, again, just they're the way they play together, and they have a year primarily together, and they address their needs in the portal with getting a rim protector with Cliff. And I just think Nate Oates, he wants to get back to a Final Four, and I just think they're going to be out for blood this year. So I got Alabama as my number one overall seed. The next two kind of get tricky. I would probably have to say Gonzaga. I just think with the transfer of Aiden Mahaney, going from St. Mary's back to UConn, and just how much St. Mary's lost, I just don't see a real competitor for them in the West Coast Conference. And I think like you mentioned before, when we were talking, that Gonzaga has a very, very big chance to go undefeated in conference play. And I think if they have a really brutal out of conference schedule, but I think if they can get to pick up some big wins, then I think they could end up being a number one seed. And then to round it out, I would probably have to say, I think I think another Big 12 team. I think I want to go with Houston as a one seed. Now I know I mentioned I'm not like a huge believer in LJ Cryer, but I think Kelvin Sampson, he'll figure out ways to get it done, and I think they're gonna have a really good regular season, and I think they'll end up being a one seed.
I hear you. Yeah. Mine is honestly on once again on a similar note. I have Alabama being my number one overall. You just can't ignore Mark Sears. You can't ignore Clifford Moore. You can't. Nate Oates has built another amazing squad. This one's probably his best one. To be completely honest with you, Nate Oates has an amazing career. This is his best squad, and it's going to show in the regular season. I think obviously Gonzaga is definitely in there. They're probably the second best number one seed to be real with you. Once again, going undefeated in conference play not impossible. Really not impossible given how good this squad is. And their only real loss is Anton Watson, which was not that big of a deal in my opinion. And I know Drew is gonna have another amazing season. Like he always does. It's hard to just
Yeah,
stop Gonzaga
right.
being Gonzaga. Honestly, put me in with Houston. Like I said before, I'm very high on LJ Cryer this year. I'm very high on anything Kelvin Sampson produces. This was probably going to be his third year in a row being number one seed. Really not surprised to see that. And then my four seed might be a hear me out moment, but I kind of want to put in Duke. I'm
Duke.
really once again high on the opportunities of this mostly freshman team, but still a team that can really portray a lot. This is giving me a lot of 2018 Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett style. You
Yeah.
have another amazing number one prospect in the country, that being Cooper Flag. You have Malak. I can't pronounce his full name all the time, but he can definitely fill in at the center role. You have Mason Gillis, Shannon James, ton of great transfers from across the country that have come to this Duke team, and it's kind of hard to just ignore them entirely. And the ACC always produces typically a one seed here and there. Last year it was UNC. This year I do think Duke fills in that role.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a world where Duke is a one seed. I just don't know if I buy it, especially just with this year. I know this is the last year where fifth year players will be, where players will be granted that fifth year of eligibility. And I just think like in the current landscape of college basketball, those fifth year players, that veteran presence, you really need that. And I just don't know if Mason Gillis can really provide that the veteran presence they need. I think a lot of that responsibility is going to fall on Malik Brown, the transfer from Syracuse, just to give their front court a little bit of more, again, veteran presence. Someone who's had experience. He's a tough player, and he'll be on the glass. But I just don't know if I buy John Shire being able to really put his guys in the best position to win. I mean, I just think back to last year. NC State was hot, but I think there's no scenario where you shouldn't be able to beat that NC State team. And obviously Cooper Flag, I think, is going to have a stellar year. I probably have him as a second, but team All American. And I know guys like Kanaye, their other 5-star player, one of their other 5 stars, he's gonna have a really big season. But I just don't know. I don't know. I think they're gonna struggle a little bit in ACC play, and I don't know if they end up becoming a 1 seed. But again, it's not impossible. I definitely think they could.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a hear me out moment because Duke wasn't even ranked that high in the AP poll, and there's definitely
Right.
consideration for everything there. But I'm a little high on the Blue Devils this year, and I think that there's a reason to be. But then comes the funner part, the Final Four.
Final
What do you have
four.
as your Final Four?
So my final four, I have Alabama. I think Alabama makes it back. Kansas. Um, I think Gonzaga makes it into the final four. I think if Khalif Battle, there's talks that he might be coming off the bench being a 6-man type of role. If Khalif Battle's willing to accept that role and just because Khalif Battle's a killer. He'll go out and get you 30 if need be. But I think if he's able to accept that role, then I think that puts Gonzaga in a really, really good spot to go far in March. And then rounding out my final four, I have Baylor. I just think Baylor's of course, they're a top 10 team, but I think they're kind of getting overlooked in preseason Final Four predictions. I just think with Jeremy Roach transferring to Baylor, kind of going back to what he said himself is kind of more his game, being able to actually play more of a point guard type of role where, the last year or two at Duke, he's kind of had to score a little bit more. It's a little not exactly his game. I think with him being able to go back to being more of a mainstream point guard, I think it's really going to benefit Baylor. And of course, VJ Edgecombe, I mean, I think he's going to be one of the best freshmen in the country this year. He's probably my pick for freshman of the year. On it, actually, no,
Ooh,
yeah, you
over
can't
Cooper
look.
Flag. Wow.
Honestly, yeah, I think VJ Edgecombe's going to light it up. Don't get me wrong, Cooper Flag. See, it's tough because I think Cooper Flag will be an All American. I don't know if VJ Edgecombe has that ceiling. Maybe VJ Edgecombe doesn't necessarily have a better season on paper than Cooper Flag, but I think he does more to impact winning than Cooper Flag will.
So you see Baylor with that too. Once again, we're kind of having similar views. I see Bama in the Final Four. It's really hard to stop this team. I think once again, this is NATO's best opportunity to win the championship, and it'll definitely show regular season and postseason. I see Gonzaga there too. I think this year is definitely a strong year for number one seeds, and if Gonzaga is a 1 seed, which I expect them to be, I definitely see them there. I definitely differ more or less on the last two. I'm more of a guy for surprise and a little bit of chaos. So
Mm-hmm.
I see St. John's. I see St.
St.
John's
John's.
pulling their way in exactly. I think one Big East team makes it. I think I was considering saying Creighton in this scenario, but I believe that with the loss of honestly a good part of their team to the draft this year, it really does lay a bigger role. And considerably speaking, that team did make the Elite Eight. So this is almost not necessarily a step back year, kind of a transient year where the team isn't necessarily getting much better, which I think would probably show in them not being able to make it all the way or even to the Final Four. St. John's, though, Rick Pitino, it's hard to really understand how good he can be in most years. And I think that this team now has almost all the tools we said before, shooting maybe not the best thing, but they do have so many good tools to not only fight through Big East play, arguably one of the best conferences in the country, but also hike through what could be a really strong um, set of games going to the Final Four. And then my
Yeah. Now
last
you.
team,
Oh,
sorry,
sorry. I just want to talk about. You mentioned Creighton.
yeah,
Now I think this is a storyline that's really getting overlooked. Now I could definitely see Creighton making a Final Four if they have a player who's on the roster named Fedor Zugic. Now he's a guy who played overseas in the best one of the best Euro leagues and averaged 13 points per game over there. Now this is a guy who he's having trouble getting declared eligible to play NCAA basketball. Now this is a guy who's 21 years old if I'm not mistaken, and he's played professional basketball at one of the highest levels. And this is a guy who probably shouldn't be able to play, but I really see this ending up in like kind of like a Big Z um, situation that happened in Kentucky last year, where middle of the season he gets eligible. And I mean, this is a guy who played professional. He's a professional. I mean, he shouldn't really probably be able to play in terms of fairness. But if he gets eligible, then I mean, I think Creighton goes to the Final Four. I think they win the Big East and go to the Final Four because I mean, this is a guy who averaged 13 points per game and one of the best Euro leagues. And if he's declared eligible, I think, he's just going to tear it up. And I think Creighton makes it to the Final Four.
I think I can definitely see that, but
But
like I
as
said
it
before, I
stands right
think
now, he hasn't
yeah,
been declared eligible yet. So, right. So, you can't say that until, he gets declared.
yeah, which will make me keep my St. John's pick. And then lastly, but not least, I have Florida in here. And I think obviously when
Ooh.
everybody's taking a little pause at this one, Florida, if you remember last year, was a 7 seed. They got eliminated by Colorado in the first rounds. Honestly, a pass by story. But I think the yearly transformation of Walter Clayton Jr. is going to be such a significant movement. He obviously won't be a Mark Sears. He might be second team, maybe third team. But I think this team will stay very competitive in SEC play. And there's really a lot that can go on with this squad. And just something tells me it's hard to really describe because obviously we're predicting this so far out. But every year there's always some random team that always makes it into March Madness and into the Final Four. Last year, there was NC State. The year before that, it was like FAU. I think that that's this team. I think that that's the chaos team that finds its way. And I think it's going to come from Walter Clayton Jr. himself, whether it's him averaging 20, 25 points a night in the regular season or just some honest shenanigans going on in the tournament to push them to that way. And then from that squad, or at least from these Final Four, I honestly see a good matchup between probably Gonzaga and Bama, with Bama taking it all, and NATO's finally getting his chip.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the Alabama is my pick to win the national championship. In terms of who they end up facing, I'd probably say it'd end up being Baylor or Kansas out of my Final Four picks. But yeah, I just think how Alabama plays in terms of their roster already, and
Yeah,
the addition of Cliff Amori, guys like Aiden Holloway and Chris Youngblood. I think they're going to be really really good.
yeah.
Tell me
Anyway,
one.
that concludes our first video. We will be producing videos at least once a week, getting ready for the season. We're doing season predictions and then general work during the actual season itself. So definitely stick around. Click the like button, follow us. We'll be part of the main show, and we will catch you